I use Claude literally every day, including weekends, and so I was convinced when I ran a test of which AI tool is best for small business owners that it would be the runaway winner. Well, the results weren't exactly what I thought. If we haven't met, I'm Samantha. I'm an operations consultant and the founder of Exhale Operations, and we help small business owners stop being the bottleneck in their business so they can get back to the work that they actually enjoy. If you like anything in this video, it would be an enormous help if you would just hit like and perhaps subscribe down below. We're a new channel and there's literally nothing that YouTube values more than those two metrics. So we appreciate it in advance. I have a lot of conversations with small business owners who want to be using AI, but are just overwhelmed with where to start. It's not even about what skills and what features to use or how to prompt, but even from the very beginning, like, are they using the right tool? ChatGPT was very popular at the beginning. Now everybody's talking about Claude. And so I thought it would be useful to do an experiment, also for my own edification, of which tool, when we're talking about for the use cases that most small business owners are using it for, is actually the best. So I designed an experiment, I ran it, and then as I was evaluating the results of this experiment, I was thinking a lot about how I would advise a small business owner like one of my clients in how they made the decision about which AI tool they would use. And so we're going to talk about it all here. I'll give you a spoiler for one of my takeaways, which is that this is not going to be a ranking video because there are some really important things you need to consider about what is specific for your business in order to evaluate what the best tool is for you. But before we dive into those takeaways, let's take a step back and talk about the experiment and how I ran it. So with any experiment, we had to start out with sort of the goal, the thesis that we were testing. In this case, I wanted to test what were the best of the top 4 tools, the ones that I hear talked about the most, which in this case are ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and Perplexity, would be the best for small business owners. Not anybody, specifically for small business owners. And that meant that these tools had to be evaluated somewhat objectively on the types of tasks that small business owners would use AI for. Now, of course, there's enormous potential to use AI in many ways, but I drilled it down to 5 core categories: task management, project planning, research, writing, and tech. Then the other thing I started to think about was that a lot of small business owners come to these tools at different levels of sort of tech readiness or AI readiness. And so I didn't want to just test prompts the way I would write prompts as somebody who is a little bit of an organization and systems nerd and spends a lot of time messing around with these platforms. So I also wanted to test beginner, intermediate, and advanced level prompts and see how the various tools manage them differently. So in terms of setting up this experiment, I first brainstormed what are specific tasks that fit under those 5 categories that a small business owner would run. And I drafted beginner, intermediate, and advanced prompts for each of those tasks. Then I created a sort of rubric. What would a successful output from AI be in response to these sorts of prompts? And then I started running them through these 4 systems. This is where we had our first fail of the experiment, because I thought, well, obviously this is a sort of repetitive task that doesn't require advanced thinking, the actual put in prompts, see what response is back, analyze. So I was like, perfect, let's set up an automation that runs all these prompts through the various tools automatically, and I just get a whole bunch of outputs. I built this on Zapier, which is my go-to automation platform. It has been since literally, I think, 2017. I would have to go back and look. I was like one of those nerds who was on this platform and I have been paying for it for that many years. I set it all up so that the prompts would be automatically sent. But turns out when you're in the Zapier platform and you're sending prompts to the models, it's not exactly the same interface call and response that you get if you're in the actual draft interface. And so the results that I was getting didn't feel like fair evaluations of the capabilities of the tools. So I had to scratch that and start doing it manually so that I felt like these were fair evaluations. The other thing that started to happen at this point as I collected this first round of responses was that I realized some of the prompts that I had set up did not have objectively good and bad answers. It was a matter of taste. And so I started to feel like I was maybe being a little biased in how I was evaluating this experiment, because for example, the task management task involved giving a bunch of tasks that a small business owner would be working on, and then I was asking these tools to help them prioritize. But there were sort of different POVs on how one would prioritize. I realized it was all getting a little bit subjective. So at this point, I paused midway through the experiment. I had pulled all the outputs for those first 5 tasks, 1 for each category, each with 3 prompts each. And I decided to write another set of tasks/prompts that had more objective rights or wrongs. I actually put in little tests that the AI could get wrong in these. So for example, in the research task that I did in round 2, to. I asked it to compare two different businesses. The sneaky thing was the second business that I asked it to compare it to actually didn't exist. So if it did a search, it was not going to find a business at the URL that it expected to, and I wanted to see if AI would catch that. Another example, in my tech task that I added in round 2, I was asking how it could automate steps in the process via tech tools, but I was looking to pay attention to whether the AI noticed that one of the things I asked it to was actually natively available. It didn't need to involve third-party integrations, so that I could tell how detail-oriented and how basically like how much the AI tools were paying attention and using common sense to solve these things. Then we ran our second round of tests. We collected all of this information, and I came back and looked at my big spreadsheet, in this case in Notion because it's my favorite, evaluating all of the different tests against the different platforms at the different levels, and we started pulling the stats against the rubrics that I set. And this is where the results surprised me. I will be honest, coming in, I had a little bit of a secret bone to pick in that I wanted to objectively justify my love of Claude. It is my go-to system. It is the one I use daily. It's the one that got me really into more advanced systems building in the AI world. I've been doing automations and stuff. Previously mentioned Zapier obsession. Zapier, I never know. I never know what the right way to say this. In summary, on our task management challenges, Claude got a score of 87.5% in the win, but this was only a minor win over Perplexity in second at 83.33. In our project planning department, again, Claude took the win with a 91.67%. This was a far and away win against all three of the other tools. Maybe a little proud of my little Claude. In the research category, which would have been the one that I would have predicted Perplexity comes out ahead, because it's sort of the one I feel like has the reputation for the best deep research, Claude still came out ahead with an 87.5%. Perplexity, though, was just behind with an 83.33%. Now, writing was a really interesting one for me. And to be clear, we only did one writing test because I realized that this one is one that's very subjective. When I switched from ChatGPT to Claude originally, one of the main reasons that I did it was because that writing was a big tool that I was using these AI functions for, and I just hated ChatGPT's style of writing. I would have said that Claude is like far and away a better writer. Interestingly, this was our one and only tie. ChatGPT and Claude both earned an 100% score on their writing-related tasks. And then the other two were tied just behind. Now, the reason that ties were more likely in this particular column was because we only did one round of tests, and it's one that's just harder because there's so much of personal style in writing. And finally, in tech, with its first one of the day, is Perplexity with a 91.67%, far and away better than the other tools. So these were some really interesting insights and not necessarily what I expected. It still sort of broad strokes indicated that for a small business owner, Claude would still be my recommendation, but there were some interesting things to dig into a little further. But before we move on completely to my takeaways, I did want to call out one other interesting piece, which was when I looked at the prompt level. So not splitting up by task, but did I give it a beginner level prompt where there was like very little context? I didn't establish what the goal was or what good looked like. An intermediate prompt which had some of the things, and an advanced prompt which has like way more specifics. You're setting more clear guardrails for the AI. I was interested to see how, when I split at the prompt level, how did these things vary? This one was a little unexpected because, as one would hope, the advanced level prompts definitely generated the best level responses. It was a score of about 82%. But interestingly, the difference between a beginner level prompt and an intermediate level prompt was way closer than I thought it would be. In fact, intermediate actually lost out by 1 point, getting right around 74%, with beginner prompts getting right around 75%. How I interpret this is that at the beginner level, the tools are trained to sort of jump to some conclusions, make some assumptions to get your best approximation, and that its conclusions or assumptions were pretty accurate to the additional information that the intermediate prompts gave us. Where it was different and what made the advanced prompts dramatically better was that I was setting more clear guardrails, or I was giving like more specifics on how I wanted it to make decisions. I'm so glad that I did this experiment because I feel far more confident in a lot of the conclusions that I had sort of like implicitly assumed about my relationship with AI and just how I was using these tools in general, and also importantly, how I was going to recommend using these tools and choosing these tools for Exhale clients. But there were some interesting takeaways that I feel like we need to walk through that may be useful for you if you're a small business and trying to figure out just sort of like which one should I choose? How should I get started? The first takeaway is gonna sound obvious, but it bears repeating again and again, which is that confidence does not equal accuracy, especially in this world of AI. I can't tell you how many times that I would be reviewing a response, especially in those second round where I set little traps to see if the AI would catch it, where the AI was answering confidently, something that was truly a hallucination. In particular, I know I talked about that example where I asked it to do a research assignment comparing and contrasting two businesses. One was real and one was completely fake. It didn't exist. And some of these outputs, y'all, were confidently giving me an assessment of how these businesses were marketing and positioning themselves when they didn't exist. And it was a reminder that if I had not paid attention, and more importantly, like if I had not come to the task with a level of preparedness, I could have just gotten bamboozled by the output of this AI. So I think that's very important when you consider the sort of quality of your outputs. There's a lot that AI can do to sort of like help get you started or help move through, but I am now being very specific about working with AI when I already have a baseline. I have looked at two websites and I have my takes. And now I want to see if it notices anything that I haven't noticed. A reminder, not trustworthy. The second big takeaway I had from this was something that I actually learned in this process that I didn't know. When you use Perplexity, you can actually change between other major models. You can be on Perplexity and pop yourself on to generating outputs using a Claude model or a ChatGPT model. And so that makes Perplexity a little bit of kind of a different beast to deal with because it has sort of different capacities. But I also think it bears mentioning that you're not just choosing which model you want to use, which is kind of where we were a couple months ago, depending on when you're watching this video. It could be years ago, but every platform just sort of had like a chat feature. You could ask it a question, it would give you a response. And so all we were really comparing there was the model that it was using and sort of how well it was trained and how it was thinking and all that good stuff. Now, in early 2026, there are also features and functionality that vary between the systems that are worth considering. So like ChatGPT's has where you can set up custom GPTs. This is like roughly similar with setting up separate projects and or skills in Claude. These things are additional setups in how you can work with things that change your experience of working with AI. It also, because it's my favorite, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about in Claude, you can be in chat mode, which is much more of that traditional, like just having a conversation. And it's very helpful. And if you have added on skills, which are like pre-trained little instruction manuals on how to do things, chat can be super powerful. But it's also now got co-work mode. And co-work can actually do things for you. It can take control of your mouse, move around your computer. It can use your browser. And so that's a functionality that's not tied to the model, although the model is the thing that like is making decisions. And so now deciding which tool to use is not just as simple as which generates the best answers, but also which functionality are you looking for and sort of how are you going to use it. My third takeaway is a reminder that choosing an AI tool does not require 100% loyalty. After this experience, I am still very confidently going to be a Claude user. That's the platform that I'm going to pay for the plan on. But having watched how much better Perplexity was, especially at troubleshooting sort of tech-related things, if I get frustrated or if I'm running up against one or two wrong answers from Claude, which happened to me yesterday where I was trying to figure out something in one of my automations that summarizes things in my inbox and Claude was not getting it right. In the future, I'm going to go use Perplexity for that because I've seen that Perplexity tends to be more accurate. It's like a better problem solver in that category. So just a reminder that you can sort of task match. Maybe pick one platform that you're going to invest in, that you're going to build your infrastructure, set up all your skills, all your good stuff. But that for certain tasks, it's okay to like pop to one of the other ones. You may have noticed here that Gemini did not win any of the categories that we set out. But you also may have noticed that there was one category that many people rave about Gemini on that it might have won if I had compared, which is image generation. Gemini, at least at the point of recording this video, has a model, I think, a feature called Nano Banana, which is a silly name, but so it goes. That just like when you're in the normal Gemini interface, you can click a little thing to like generate an image and it like activates Nano Banana. And it has been the most successful AI tool for me in terms of generating images and graphics that I like. So that would be a perfect example of task mastering. Like I've tried with Claude on the image generation, just not there. ChatGPT is fine if you're doing like a funny thing for an invitation, but like for the specific things that I would use as a business owner, I'm gonna pop over to Nano Banana to use that. But again, not something I'm going to pay for. I can then use my Canva subscription to get rid of any watermark. Like, this is where you can get a little strategic, so you're not having to pay for a bunch of tools if you want it for different things, and you also don't have to be like 100% committed to one. Another one of my takeaways is that prompting really is a big differentiator here. And this kind of gets taken to another level when you start implementing things like skills and context documents and projects, which are sort of like taking prompts to the next level, so you don't have to repeat yourself every time. But as we saw when I evaluated at a prompt difficulty level, advanced prompts with all that extra context were dramatically better. They did better outputs. And so taking the time to learn how to prompt the ways sort of AI does well when you prompt it is really valuable in terms of getting good outputs out of here. But this is also where some of the functionalities of these platforms are really important because, like I've mentioned, using skills and projects in Claude to sort of bake in instructions and the way that you like things will save you time when you're in your day-to-day, because it will effectively already be pre-prompted, and then you're just giving it like a specific prompt. So it's something that I definitely recommend small business owners invest in, because like we got lots of shit to do. This is also like literally something that Excel does for clients, is if you want us to help you get set up and get some prompts ready. But this is where, while this test was super useful in sort of taking big takeaways, it did, like at various points in the process, I was sort of like, okay, this is only so useful because the more I could set these things up with baked in context, the more I wouldn't need to evaluate just this like first level answer. One of the coolest parts about using these tools is that you can go back and forth with it. You can call out when it makes a mistake. You can say, hey, you sound like an AI bot writing. Can you try again? And in fact, that's one of my favorite tricks that I have in my Claude system. Is I actually have a document that has all of like the AI writing ticks. And so when it writes something for me that sounds like AI wrote it, I can say, hey, go reference that document and rewrite this because you're giving yourself away here. And that's been super valuable in increasing the level of my output. My fifth and final takeaway from this experiment is that starting is the most important part. I have in my day interacted with a lot of like high performing women who want to get everything right, like people pleaser tendencies, perfectionist tendencies, all that good stuff, where you're so afraid to make the wrong call that then you don't make any call. You get like stuck in analysis paralysis. The thing that was so interesting was even in between, like when I did the first batch of tasks, and then by the time I came back with the second batch for this test, the tools had already improved. And so any amount of time that you delay yourself starting, just like getting a toe dipped in the water, starting to get a little comfortable, is like just more time that you're missing out. And so I would so much rather you just make the best decision for you right now and try to just get entrenched in using one tool rather than like testing and learning across all of the different ones. I hope this experiment has helped you a little bit so that you feel like some research has been done and you don't need to go do the sort of compare and contrast yourself. But just like getting in there and picking something and getting even average at it. Like, you don't have to get to great. Even just getting average at it is going to put you so much further ahead than if you table this to address next week and the week after that and the week after that. So if you came into this video hoping for this is the tool you should be using as a small business owner, I'm not going to give you 100% a firm answer. I'm going to tell you that my conclusion coming out of this experiment was continuing to be a Claude loyalist. I'm going to use it for most tasks. I have most of my infrastructure built in there, and this reinforced for me that having that infrastructure is really valuable versus like having certain things that you do in certain places. But for certain very specific tasks, I am going to use the other tools strategically. I'm going to use Nano Banana for image generation when I need it. For certain research tasks, especially sort of like tech implementation related, I might double check Claude with Perplexity or just like let them sort of battle it out. And I don't know that ChatGPT is in my wheelhouse very much anymore. Honestly, I used it the other day because my Claude ran out of credits and I needed to do something that wasn't that important to me. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll go to ChatGPT. That's my answer. For you, does not have to be the right answer, but more than anything else, I would encourage you to just pick one and get started, because I don't think there's any perfectly perfect answer here. Like, if you really like ChatGPT's writing style, get after it if that's going to get you going on it. But I hope seeing some somewhat objective, somewhat scientific experiments evaluating between these tools may help you get over that analysis paralysis hump and into just testing out the tools. If anything in this video is useful for you, it'd be really helpful to me if you would just hit like down below. We're a brand new channel, and so those metrics really matter to us. It really means the world. If you really like what you see, obviously we'd be completely honored with a subscribe, but I'll leave that up to you. And with that, I'll see you in the next one.